Hello, everyone. It's so good to see you all here for today's discussion at the Consortium of Indo-Pacific Researchers. I'm Indu Saxena, and today's topic is shifting geopolitics in the Middle East amid US-China rivalry. Thank you for joining us for this important discussion. And for this session, we have the expert and panelist here that my colleague, Rachel Aboud, she will be introducing very soon. Just let me set the stage for this discussion. As we know, the China's growing influence in the region and the Middle East countries, they are just changing their code and aligning with the different major players, China, Russia, and so there is a kind of chessboard here, strategic chessboard, though initially it was seemed that China is just growing economically, expanding its economic clout, but recently China played a important role in normalization of Saudi Arab and Iran relations, come up as a peace deal maker. So looking at the China's security interest in the security and political issues, it is quite important for the United States to maintaining dominant in the region, and how the other countries, Turkey, India, Iran, are playing in this region. So before handing over to my colleague Rachel, I would like to say, if you have any question in the audience, please put your questions in chat. And I would like to mention that views expressed and presented here are personal, should not be constituted to any organization. Thank you. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Indu, and welcome everyone for today's discussion. My name is Rachel Aboud, and I'm delighted to be joined by my friend and colleague Indu Saxena and our esteemed panel of experts. I will be moderating this discussion, which is broadly focused on the US-China rivalry, as you mentioned, Indu, more specifically on the shifting geopolitics in the Middle East amid this US-China rivalry. As the United States reduces its footprint in the Middle East, China is increasing its political and economic engagement. The Middle East has become what has some termed a theater of competition for a new Cold War of sorts. The growing role of China as the largest financial investor in the Middle East has captured some attention and has led some to speculate about the future of both the region and the nature of US-China relations. Today, we will be looking at how the Middle East will navigate this shift in terms of costs versus benefits, what the role is of China, what role will China be playing on economic and security issues in that region, and how all of this will affect the US's role as a dominant world power. However this goes, the fact still remains that there are major changes and challenges ahead. Here to unpack these challenges are Ambassador Anil Trigunat and Mohammed Suleiman. Also, Dr. Ahmed Zal is supposed to be joining us. He may be a little bit late, but we will begin this discussion without him for now. Ambassador Anil Trigunat, as a career diplomat, Ambassador has served in the Indian missions in Cote d'Ivoire, Bangladesh, Mongolia, USA, Russia, Sweden, and Nigeria. He served in Moscow as Deputy Chief of Mission in the rank of Ambassador. He was also India's Ambassador to Libya, Jordan, and High Commissioner to Malta. He is associated with several think tanks and chambers of commerce. He regularly writes in newspapers, media, and has published several papers, books, and periodicals. Moving on to our next guest, Mohammed Suleiman. Mohammed Suleiman is the director of MEI's Strategic Technologies and Cybersecurity Program and a manager at McClary Associates Middle East and North Africa practice. His work focuses on the intersection of technology, geopolitics, and business in the Middle East and North Africa. Mohammed frequently appears on Arabic and English language television to provide commentary on unfolding events in the Middle East. Thank you all for joining us. In the interest of time, as mentioned, I want to ask each of you to outline two major shifts in the Middle East that have stemmed from this from the deteriorating US-China relationship. Ambassador, let me start with you, please, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So if you would please outline for us two major shifts that have stemmed from this US-China rivalry.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Indu and Rachel and the esteemed panelists with me for including me in this discussion. Firstly, I would like to say that from India's point of view, and my own personal view is that West Asia, or which you call as Middle East, is probably the most important geography for many reasons, which are pretty obvious, be it energy, be it economy, be it expatriates, or for that matter, sea lanes of communications and maritime trade. And so it is very important. That's why we keep track and we have close relationship with them. At the same time, as you know, that China is one country which has become a common denominator for troubles between India and the United States, and therefore cause of cooperation. And today, my Prime Minister is in Washington, D.C. on the state visit. As far as China is concerned, the problem with China has been that it is continuing to indulge in expansionist, hegemonistic, wolf warrior diplomacy. It has a country which has 14, 15 countries. It has the borders. It has disputes with 24 countries. But then China is very ambitious. And it came out in 2013 with a policy which was its Arab policy by BRI, so which was adopted by a very large number of countries. Whole of Middle East, from Tehran to Tel Aviv, are a part of it. And very quietly, under the radar with the United States, we know that they continued to expand their footprint, primarily in the manner which can be called as economic or geoeconomics. But whatever they have done in terms of infrastructure development, it is quite easily possible to convert them and securitize them. So from their perspective, it is a long-term thinking. And it's a long-term contestation with the United States, which is the major power in the region. And what has changed the whole course is that the contestation under Xi Jinping has come in the open. It was further enhanced by the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic on the Middle Eastern countries, as well as by the Russia-Ukraine war. Both of these have brought about clear fault line in the region and amidst countries. Now, since the United States focused a great deal on containing China in the Indo-Pacific, and very often we saw whether it was an attack by the Houthis on the Saudi or the UAE targets, where the response from the United States was not forthcoming. So the fact is that Saudi Arabia, which happens to be the largest importer of weapon systems in the world, actually has the most latest weaponry, was not able to see their efficacy, whether it was the Yemen war or whether protecting themselves. And they saw that China is a country which has been standing up to the United States. So obviously, they converted their Act East policy, something called Act East policy, which means go to where your bread lies. And that is where they are selling their their oil. And so China, India, Japan, South Korea. So Asia has become a primary reason for engagement with these countries. And all these countries have also been wooing China. China has a different policy compared to the United States. For example, the United States will talk of democracy, human rights, interventions, call Saudi Crown Prince, who is now Prime Minister, as a pariah, and that those kind of things don't go down well, which shows perhaps they don't have a clear understanding about what the Arabs are like. Then China also did not believe in capitalizing on the divisions between these countries or creating divisions. It is looking at Saudi Arabia, Iran, including Israel, as a one whole and trying to work with them without a non-prescriptive policy, non-interventionist policy, at least overtly. So that is what we have seen the difference when President Biden came to Riyadh and what happened when President Xi Jinping came to Riyadh. So the difference of the two you can see. And that is the reason that they have generated a kind of confidence that they have brought about the rapprochement in the region. which they have capitalized on it. It was already going on. Now the countries in the region have begun to see that their own contestations, whether it is geopolitical, whether it is geoeconomic or geo-religious, they have limitations and make them indulge into this mutually destructive syndrome. They saw the Abraham Accords happening. They saw the I2U2. They are saying IUSU. These are the efforts by United States to maintain security for Israel and for some kind of a rapprochement within the region. But that was it. It was against Iran. It was against China. Whereas China is very quietly and smartly has been operating it and has signed an agreement with Iran and with Saudi Arabia, the strategic partnerships. So this is the approach difference one has seen, and these countries have responded to that, realizing very well that they will need to have, I would say, they have to spread their risk in different baskets. So that's what probably they are trying to do. They are trying to become a member of the BRICS, member of different currencies. Again, as de-dollarization happens, as Cold War II happens, they're positioning themselves as a strategic autonomy. So they are trying to do what everybody is trying to do for, except the superpowers. So I think that in the Middle East, best thing that is happening at the moment is it will not last, because there are deeper fissures. But at the time, for the time being, what we are seeing is that there is a rapprochement that is happening among various, whether it is even, I was in Cairo 2 days ago, even Tehran and Cairo are talking. There are Turkey and UAE, everybody is now trying to be on good terms with one another so that they can continue to face the difficulties, internal domestic reforms, as well as external challenges.
Thank you, Ambassador. You mentioned something about BRICS, which I want to circle back to, but after we hear from Mohammed Slayman. Mohammed, the floor is yours.
Thank you again. Thank you for your invitation. It's an honor to be here. To your question about what I see as major shifts, I would say the U.S.-China relationship complicated many of the regions around the world around issues from energy security to economic partnership and geopolitics. But the Middle East specifically, I would say they are they're getting most of the heat of the China-U.S. relationship for many reasons, including they have a dichotomy, specifically in the Gulf. When you have the U.S. as your security guarantor, the United States still maintains an unchallenged security position, dominant security position in the Gulf. In the same time, you have China as your biggest trading partner, biggest energy importer. Your position, your own policy choices are a bit limited and usually perceived. Any choice you make or any statement you make is always seen from that sort of lens, unlike any other region, unlike South Africa or Brazil, Argentina. So there's more pressure on the Gulf in terms of the U.S.-China relationship. And specifically, post-Ukraine war, now there's a term that I use, that's me. I say, we are not at war. It's not war times, but also it's not peace times. Meaning we are in between, we're in a gray area. All these countries are trying to understand where's their position, how they're going to prioritize their own relationships with these great powers, how to make sure that they're not really being drawn into these sorts of competitions that will take a toll on their economic development, on their finances, on their geopolitical integrity. So there's a lot of factors that they need to take care of. And I would say after Ukraine, tensions in Europe are high. Of course, this is the biggest land war since Second World War, but also tensions in Asia are high, and the Gulf is looking into this. I mean, the Gulf sees the situation around Taiwan, sees the level of the intensity, the growing intensity between China and the United States in the Indo-Pacific. They see all these multilaterals that are centered around security, from AUKUS to Quad, to many of these initiatives. And then the Gulf is trying to make sense of all these dynamics. Part of it is diplomacy first approach. So when you have the Arab Summit in Jeddah, okay, so you have President Assad coming from the cold, but also you have President Zelensky. So they're trying to present their choices as we're not picking a side. We have Assad, we know is on the Russian side, but we also have Zelensky in the same summit. We are trying to engage in diplomacy between Ukraine and Russia. We are trying to, we are giving aid to Ukraine during the war. So again, it's all about maintaining that sort of delicate balance between the Eurasian axis, China, Russia, and the United States and the West. So that's number one. That's the biggest shift. The second shift I see is it's multi-alignment. Everyone is going for multi-alignment, and this is not only the Gulf. It's the Gulf. It's India. It's Brazil. We focus more on one issue that's in common between our nations than full alignment. So they're very okay with the idea that we are in a security partnership with the United States, and we have an economic partnership with China, and we want to expand that. And they are joining a big group of nations that expand from Indonesia, Turkey, India, Brazil. And you can see this in the G20 dynamics when Saudi Arabia works with India and Turkey and Indonesia on getting a statement trying to push for diplomacy in the Ukraine war. So it's also part of this new trend of multi-alignment, an end of the unipolar moment, a recognition that these nations are sovereign and they have ability to care about their own national interest, even if this goes against legacy relationships that characterize their foreign policy for the last 70 years.
Thank you, Mohammed. You touched upon a multi-alignment or economic in terms of economic expansion, which kind of ties into the BRICS alignment. So I want to go back to Ambassador's point about the BRICS. What are the implications from your perspective on this rivalry should Saudi Arabia decide to join the BRICS? I mean, I just heard recently that Bangladesh is waiting for an invitation to join the BRICS. So if you could talk to us a little bit about that, and maybe I can get your thoughts on that too, Mohammed, after Ambassador goes. You're on mute, Ambassador.
Thank you. As you know that BRICS was coined not as a grouping of any kind of political grouping or geostrategic grouping. It was termed by Jim O'Neill as an economic, emerging economies who are going to, and it has come true to a great extent now. Of course, Russia is the smallest economy in the grouping at the moment now. And maybe difficult for them to carry on after the war. It might be decimated further. There might be military power, yet still we will see that. But at the same time, the BRICS had a unique composition. It has created its own institutions, including a BRICS bank, which was even said to be some kind of an alternative to Bretton Woods institutions. I mean, that's been flagged at that time. So what we are seeing today, and it is also, and after my discussions with many of the European parliamentarians and others, that this de-dollarization that we are hearing is something that is increasingly becoming a reality, for which I'm afraid who is accused is the US administration. Because in accordance, when they tried to put Russia out completely of the SWIFT system, they tried to put their $360 billion, froze that assets. This has completely shaken the confidence of many countries in dependence on one economy. And that is one of the reasons that the Arab countries, more and more countries in the world, are entering into bilateral exchanges. Now there are 19 countries, including you mentioned Saudi Arabia and Bangladesh, that are really have applied for becoming a member of the BRICS. I doubt very much that all 19 will be taken immediately, but at least 5 or 6 are strong contenders, including Saudi Arabia. All these countries are also part of the AIIB, which is a Chinese bank, development bank. And China is also, and in fact, all the BRICS countries want a greater reforms of the multilateral organizations, which are largely governed and controlled to some extent by the United States and the West. So what are these countries looking at, the Middle East countries? They are looking at a possibility. Now, we have heard that yuanization of many currencies. We have seen Saudi Arabia is talking, or probably has already entered some arrangement for oil payments by China in yuan. The Emiratis have become a conduit for the Russian trade this time. India has signed with about 1929 countries the rupee arrangement. Rupee ruble is already very well known everywhere in the world. SIPS is a Chinese clearing system like the SWIFT. Russians had created their own system. They had all started um, banking their currencies on the basis of either gold or commodities, whereas US in 1974 decided not to have any backing by the gold. So it is a psychologically upheld currency reserve. This is something now these countries are realizing. In the Middle East, there is another realization that it is petrodollars that had fueled the growth in the West to a great extent, and then we should try to take charge of our lives. And this is how I look at it, and my discussions, it comes out very clearly with these people. And they say that we are looking to, again, spread the risk, spread the financial risk. So you have transaction cost will be much lower. You will not be totally dependent on one or the other in that sense. So it is way ahead, way far ahead what we are looking at, that dollar will be replaced. Very unlikely. But at the same time, you will have, if a Cold War 2 kind of a situation happens, this will be totally governed by the current weaponization of financial instruments, which will create some kind of a division on this very front, which will be a unique trait of the next kind of a Cold War 2.0. So all these countries are basically looking, the BRICS is coming out with its own currency, which will have not yet. I mean, I think it is also a bit too early in the media. It might be just envisaged a little more. Some details are coming in, how it will be backed, who will back it, what kind of banking. So all these countries are interested. And the good thing is that most of the countries that are joining are either middle powers, rich countries with their sovereign wealth funds. And so that will add to the heft that the BRICS has.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. Mohammed, what is your take on that? Do you agree that we're far away from the, well, first on the BRICS and also on the point that Ambassador had made about that we're far away from the de-dollarization?
I don't particularly disagree. I look into it from a different perspective, meaning I think BRICS has a symbolic meaning for these nations. I think when Saudi Arabia and Egypt are looking into applying to BRICS, they just want to make a statement. We are in this new multi-alignment era where we should not be seen as just in partnership or alliance with the West. We are much more independent, and we're happy to be in economic partnership with Russia, China, India, South Africa, and BRICS. So that's the first point. The second point, I'm still skeptical about the idea of a BRICS currency, and part of it is we have seen the euro experience and how long this take for a union to come up with a currency. So I still feel that a BRICS currency is still a long shot, moonshot project. And on top of that, the level of disparity between these nations who are within the BRICS or the newcomers, again, economic, financial disparity, very hard to see the BRICS being transformed into more than a summit. We can have summits, conferences, frameworks, but so far, especially in this era where trade is being seen as is seen from a skeptical standpoint, there's no 1990s anymore. Open borders and free flow of goods and services are going through an era. I'm not going to call it deglobalization, but more of globalization 2.0. It's more about regionalism, more about regional integration than more of a global culture. So these, I would say, that the three main points I see about the BRICS. It's symbolic. Countries are looking to BRICS as a statement. We're not with anyone, but we are not against anyone. And I think this is, again, it's for the success of BRICS as a brand. And like the ambassador said, it started in 1990s, early 2000s, emerging markets coalition. And I think it again reflects the rise of the West. Middle powers want to be much more proactive on the international scene.
Thank you. I know we touched upon briefly, we mentioned Russia and the Ukraine crisis, which I think is a very important point to unpack, because the perception is that ever since the Ukraine crisis, the retreat has begun by the United States, meaning the retreat from the Middle East, right? And the coziness has started to occur between the Middle Eastern countries and China. Now, from your point of view, from where you're sitting and from your expertise, what was there a single turning point, or was there several factors that had led the countries in the Middle East to turn to China in such a way? I know you guys mentioned something about economic security or economic expansion, which is the obvious answer. But there are other narratives that point to like issues of food security that were caused by the Ukraine crisis. Or was it just tied into just the actual retreat of the United States from that region, the disengagement, the void that the Middle East, that so many call, is very unfamiliar to that region, right? They're always used to having somebody hovering over them, right? So what is your take on that? Anybody, Ambassador Muhammad wants to take this question first? Doesn't matter.
I can take a
Go ahead.
crack at this. So I'm gonna give I'm a voice of dissent here in Washington and the Gulf. The United States posture in the Gulf did not change, meaning the number of personnel and equipment and military footprint in the Gulf did not change. What changed is the political commitments associated with this military footprint became minimum. What I mean by that? I mean that when the Iranians attacked Abqaiq and Kharais in Saudi Arabia, the Aramco oil facilities, there was no US response. It was during the Trump administration. And that should be seen as the end of the Carter Doctrine, that the United States is redefining its political commitments in the Gulf. And that reflects many realities, including number one, America is the biggest energy producer. This is not a country in 1980s, 1990s that's heavily reliant on imports. So the perception of the United States as a producer also reflected its own geopolitics. It's still America cares about free flow of energy from the Gulf because that impacts global economy and global growth, and this is important to the U.S. national security, of course, but it's not the same level. That's number one. Number two, America is repositioning globally, not only in the Middle East. This is not really very specific to the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Since President Obama, President Trump, and now President Biden, has been this a new line in Washington that we need to go back to the basis of the U.S. grand strategy, which is we are offshore balancer. Our own importance, our own advantage is the high seas and the airspace. That's it. America doesn't really do well in since after the Second World War. America doesn't do well in land wars. America does well in navy wars, in airspace. This is how it was able to change the dynamics in the First and Second World War and even the Cold War to some extent. So what does it mean? It means we need to look into how we can deal with the Russia and China from that standpoint as an offshore balancer. So how you are repositioning yourself. And that explains to you how, why America has been going that trend, this US trend of minilaterals. So do AUKUS, do the Korea-Japan-US trilateral, bring Philippines to a quadrilateral format or meetings with the Japanese and the Australians, deepen the Japanese integration in terms of military planning. So most of the work the United States is doing is based on the idea of mini coalitions, America as an offshore balancer, bringing more allies and partners with you on defense terms. So back to the original region, the Gulf. The Gulf is also going through the same trend. So that explains the ITU-2. It doesn't include on paper a security architecture. However, when you see how in the first communication, the first statement from the presidents and the leaders of the states, It endorsed the Abraham Accords. It endorses the Najaf Forum. It talks about safety and security. And then you see these sort of joint projects that include Israeli-Indian air defense system going to the UAE. This is not really just an economic framework. And add to that the recent Jake Sullivan meeting in Saudi Arabia with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and India. So the movements are different. So they're trying to change the political commitments. They're trying to say we are here only for state conflicts. We're here to be offshore balancer. We're here to make sure that we don't leave space for others. But it doesn't mean we're going to engage in nation building. That's an era of the past. Like there's no more Iraq, no more Afghanistan. We are not going to have the expensive U.S. intervention that characterized U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East for the last 70 years. So they're making sure that their commitments are a bit lowered and match their global strategy.
Thank you, Mohammed. I want to go back to Ambassador. I want to turn to Ambassador now. So the shift from the U.S. shift from interventionist to offshore balancer. What do you see as the unintended consequences of such a policy or such an agenda in the Middle East? I mean, we see that there's been a favorable. Go ahead.
No, I fully agree with what Mohammed has said about U.S. trying to turn into sort of a balancer. But the problem is that the geopolitics is moving rather fast. Currently, Chinese position is being challenged and threatened by the the American position is being challenged by the Chinese across geographies. It is not only in terms of, I mean, which other country had 140, 150 countries endorsing a particular project like the BRI? The whole of Middle East is very much invested in this project. And that project directly gives them a certain advantage. President Biden talked about Build Back Better, the Gateway, Blue Gateway, whatever it is. So many projects, but where is the money? Nothing is coming on the show. On the other hand, the Chinese are trying to show that, yes, we are here. We are here for a mutual advantage. Those are the kind of approaches that they have been able to do. So currently, I feel is that I may be totally wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. The thing is that the world is actually, after the Russia-Ukraine war, will enter into the Cold War 2.0 phase. And when that happens, what the United States is trying to do is take the fight to the Indo-Pacific near China through Taiwan Straits. That's how the Chinese perceive it, and that's why they are trying to confront them. Of course, overtly, China, USA and China both are trying to minimize the risk. China is trying to buy the time in order to achieve its objectives, which it has done till the 2049, it says, but by 2030, it feels that it can achieve a position where it will be able to get to numero uno position, be it technologically or be it economically. They are going fast, irrespective of whatever we might say. We have seen the global dependence of China has actually increased in the past. Despite all the efforts that have been made, the trade has increased with China much more. Today, what we are looking at is both of them are trying to work on a policy called competition with cooperation. So to the extent possible, so that there is no complete disruption in the global supply chains. And that's where the countries like India have emerged as a good alternative for them. And so the United States is looking at India from that perspective. China and India have their own problems, both on the border, maritime geography as well as the other. India is a resident power in the Indian Ocean. And for it, Malacca Straits down to West Asia, everything is part of its Indo-Pacific strategy. So since it is going to become a major theater, it is obvious to understand that the United States focus remains very much there on in the Indo-Pacific maritime geography. For them, basically, the Eurasian war, which is happening now, has become a stumbling block of sorts, because that was something that was not expected in the beginning, but it was done by both sides, whatever happened, because it is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. It is a war between Russia and the West. So it's as simple as that. So the situation is quite in a fluid stage, as they say. I mean, nobody knows which way it is going to really turn into. But if that happens, and so for that, the most of the countries which say that the middle powers, rich powers, emerging economies, they're trying to position themselves. That's exactly what we have seen the impact. There are these 4F which were weaponized during this war. One is the weaponization of financial instruments, which I spoke about, the weaponization of food, weaponization of fuel and fertilizers. So the South, global South completely suffered immensely, continues to suffer. And that is a problem that gives you not a comfort with regard to the superpowers. I always maintain, and if you were to just look at few years beyond, just in 1990s, the invasion of Iraq were the worst thing that has given jitters to the world. There were not such kind of a terrorism that existed. It got propelled into it. It became a new problem. So anywhere you have the crisis of confidence in the system, which is representative only of the vanquished and the victor mindset of the Second World War, is really the main cause of concern for most countries in the world. But the Sino-US competition is for real. That's
Okay, I want to take a question. I see here a question from one of our audience.
Yeah, Rachel, here, let me jump in here. So, Ambassador and Mohammed, here is one question from Dr. Karim. So, like he's saying, like China has a problem with the soft power, and I would combine this question with my kind of thoughts for you and for Ambassador both. So, for Ambassador, what kind of role that India wants to play with this grouping, ITU2, when we saw that Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Egypt, though we hosted the Egypt's president at the Republic Day in this year, so they skipped the G20 Kashmir. And sometimes when it comes to some other regional issues, do you think that United States and India's grouping this ITU2 can compete with China in the soft power, although that Mohammed mentioned that it's not a security alliance. We know that it's a Quad, and some experts refer it as a West Asia Quad. And Mohammed, it's for you. I just want to know that the Crown Prince vision, Mohammed bin Salman MBS, that we called popularly known as the Saudi Vision 2030. And like it seems that the Saudi Arabia is aspiring as a global leadership, and along with the Turkey, and then moving away from this whole oil dependency on oil, just moving toward diversifying its towards infrastructure, health, and not the health, maybe the tourism. So I would like to comment from both of you, please.
Well, Dr. Indu, as far as I2U2 is concerned, I think that already there are 3 partners in this. For example, Israel, UAE, and India. They have been collaborating quite significantly. From India's point of view, all the other 3 are the strategic partners. And they are important partners in technology, in defense sector, in finance, in energy security. But what the Gulf has been looking at is, more importantly, is about enhancing its food security, technological availability, and of course, an advantage with the United States as far as relationship with Israel is concerned. So that is one of the factors for the UAE and others for joining the Abraham Accords, or for that matter. As far as the I2U2 concerned, there are 2 or 3 very important projects, and they are projects which are non-security, direct security aspirations, as we talk about in the traditional context. But food security is very important. That is why UAE is investing about $2 billion in the food corridor project in India. They will be carried out in India. Likewise, there will be a hybrid energy project, which is quite significant. And they're looking at many other new projects in the area of energy, in health, in food security, or the modern day challenges, apart from the technology and transfer cybersecurity, green growth, and all those kind of issues are very much there. It is easier to operate in a smaller grouping than in a very big grouping. The other big grouping has come up with IPEF, as you know, and we have become a member of that. China led, there is RCEP, another very major grouping like that. So I2U2, even though if you can call it Quad, it doesn't make any difference, because another Quad, which is security, has come up recently, as you know, with Philippines, USA, Australia, and Japan, which is just last, I think about 10, 15 days back, they had the meeting of the Shangri-La Dialogue on this. And this was the new thing, a security grouping which has come up. So I2U2 is mutually beneficial. Now, for example, UAE is our third largest trading partner. And we have signed the first comprehensive economic partnership agreement with any country that is. UAE has signed a CPA with Israel. That was another fastest one. USA, we already have a very expansive relationship. It is our largest trading partner. So I think that there are many commonalities that can work. Also, I say that the I2U2 has a greater possibility with the trilateral synergies to be used in other countries or continents like Africa. So it is quite possible to do that. So there are several possibilities which they are currently, I would say, calculating, which can be to the mutual advantage of each other.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. Mohammed, would you like to weigh in? Actually,
something about soft power. You mentioned about Mr. Karim's question. You see, the thing is that China is reinventing itself in the Middle East, as far as soft power is concerned. But ironically, and Mohammed can perhaps answer better about this question, despite all the countries, and we have Saudi Arabia as the custodian of two holy mosques and all that, the whole of Middle East combined ignores the plight of Uyghurs. So that is one thing. But China is trying to project itself that it has Muslim mosques, it has everything, they are equal citizens, they are everything. So they are buying out into it, which shows that power has its own language. That's what I would say. So they say it is an internal problem, and we will discuss internally, and we are communicating our concerns to this or that. But at the same time, if that thing happens anywhere else in the world, you have other vocal voices. And you mentioned about, but they are not participating at the Tourism Summit. Whose laws is it anyway? You imagine. Now, today in the world, the second largest contributor to tourism are Indians. And they are the biggest spenders in any tourism. So anybody who's looking to have more tourism, currently Saudi Arabia is aiming to invite a lot of tourists from all over. They're changing the policies. They are our strategic partners. Things are moving ahead with India also. So I think that all these combined, and there are multiple channels of cooperation that are emerging, bilateral, sub-regional, regional, and global.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mohammed, your thoughts?
Well, I'm biased. I mean, the I2U2, I worked on this as an idea, but also as a policy platform. And I think when we look into the I2U2, we should look into it as a vehicle. It's a vehicle that starts now as economics-based, food corridor. We're getting together. We're rethinking about the Middle East as West Asia. We're thinking about food security, maritime security. America's repositioning within that group. India's coming to the Middle East. So even though the I2U2 right now is very specific to specific projects, I would say it could go through another level of transformation in the future. So meaning the fact that it started as food security centric, technology centric organization doesn't mean it will stay that way in the future. And we have seen the Quad. I mean, Quad, as we all know, started as humanitarian dialogue surrounding tsunami, and here we are. Quad is a very important mini-lateral in the Indo-Pacific that covers many issues and threats. So this is how I think about the I2U2. I think it's phenomenal. I think it's important, consequential framing, and I think it's laying the ground field to more mini-laterals in the region. So we have the UAE, France, India trilateral. We have the India, US, UAE Saudi Arabia quadrilateral that's just started a few weeks ago in Riyadh. So that trend is not just confined to the I2U2, but the I2U2 started that trend. And I think it's good. I mean, having that sort of working relationship between global powers, middle powers, and regional powers in a region that's very important as the Middle East is important, welcomed, and also leading to more dialogue on less sensitive issues. Again, it's very difficult to have a conversation about Korean War and aligning on that Korean War. But everyone cares about food security. Everyone cares about economic diversification, maritime security. This is very important and very it creates common ground between these capitals. So this is how I see the I2U2, and this is how also was my idea when I started putting words to paper, pen to paper a few years ago to discuss this idea. On the question of soft power, I come from the really school of thought, and sometimes as someone who believes in numbers, and it's very hard for me to quantify what soft power is. I don't know what soft power is. It could be culture, it could be tourism, it could be many things. I say the most tangible thing is hard power. This is the kind of power that we're able to assess. This is the kind of power that's deemed more consequential in the Middle East. The Middle East is more about hard power, equipments, personnel, fighting. It was not really like Asian peace or European Union dynamics. The Middle East has been characterized by conflict, cycles of conflict for the last 70 or 80 years. And from that perspective, I still think you're going to have this dual identity for the foreseen future. The United States as a security guarantor with unmatched military dominance in the region, and China as a major economic power in the region. And then it would be interesting to see how these two countries with these two significant advantages are going to handle their own differences and their different positions and their different priorities in the region. Someone could argue that China helping with the Iran-Saudi agreement is a very important moment in this dynamics. However, I would argue that they're taking more credit than they should be. And second, there's a lot of skepticism about the entirety of this sort of agreement and the intentions behind the two parties to do that sort of agreement. China is still a bit far away from that position to be a guarantor or to offer guarantees to different countries in the Gulf and the Middle East, or to transform its own economic dominance into a major strategic advantage at the expense of the United States, at least for the time being.
Thank you, Mohammed. I'd like to pause here for a second to welcome Dr. Ahmed Uysal, who just joined us from Turkey.
Hello.
Hi, nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
I'm going to give a
Nice
quick introduction to Dr. Ahmed. Dr. Ahmed Uysal is a political sociologist focused on Arab affairs and Turkish. He has graduated from the Technical University Sociology Department. He received his master's and doctoral degree at the Southern Illinois University. Previously, he taught at the Dumlupınar and Marmara Universities. Currently, he is teaching in Istanbul University's International Relations Department. Dr. Uysal has also lived in Egypt as an AUC Research Fellow in 2010, and he has recently published a book on Turkey's image in Egypt before and after the revolution. Welcome again. Thank you for joining us. Before I circle back to one of the comments made about the Abraham Accords, which I want to unpack a little bit, I want to pose a question for Dr. Ahmed Uysal regarding Turkey. We're talking about the US-China rivalry and its effect on the Middle East at the moment. How has Turkey responded to this unstable and uncertain environment, given its position as the bridge between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, and Erdogan's re-election, will we see continued balancing from Turkey, excuse me, or a stronger leaning towards the Middle East, Russia and China nexus?
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Indu, for the invitation. And sorry about my miscalculation about the time difference.
Oh, no worries.
And hope that it was a good discussion for me, and I hope to contribute also. Of course, we are in the middle of all this chaos from the crisis in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen. Yeah, I mean, the Middle East basically is the intersection of our crossroads between three continents. I mean, Asia, Europe, and Africa. And plus, we connect the seas, Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean, and Turkey also connects to the Black Sea. And we realize how important was the Black Sea after the Ukraine war. And, you know, the whole world was starving because of, you know, Ukrainian grains and also Russian grains not reaching to the markets. And of course, we know also the world is changing, and the Western setup in the Middle East also is not sustainable. It's not and is not built on good, you know, democratic and developmental approach. You know, the Middle East has almost everything, but they are suffering from, you know, poverty, from repression, from the divisions. Sometimes these divisions between countries, sometimes these divisions between sectarian groups, and sometimes between nations. And of course, I don't blame the Middle Eastern people. You know, Arabs, Kurds, and Turks, they lived together for almost like 1,000 years or more without a major problem. But this current setup is done after the First World War and did not change much. Of course, it was affected from the Cold War, situation or context, but it did not change much. And even after the end of the Cold War, the situation did not change very much. And then we had, of course, the Arab people's aspiration for democracy with the Arab Spring, what they call it, Arab Spring, and turn into a autumn or into a sad situation with crisis, with military coups, and with also hurting many people. And the recent example is Sudan, that fell into again with the more or less like a civil war, and we are used to it with Libya, with Syria, with Yemen. And of course, the situation is changing also in the Middle East with after realizing America maybe can get out anytime or anyway, like surprisingly, like Afghanistan surprised many people, many countries, also worried many countries like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. They thought they depend on American security umbrella, but now they are worried and they try to take care of their security, military security, but also food security, water security, and other securities. So this change, this situation caused anxiety, and they also seek maybe guarantees or seek kind of assurances from China, the second superpower. Also, Turkey, in the meantime, of course, they fell apart with the Arabian Gulf countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates with the Arab democracies, because Turkey as a democracy supported democracy in this region. But of course, the Arab people are left alone. Even the West did not support them, except for some lip service. Then, of course, Turkey not in a situation to sustain all this, all this effort, and began to be more realistic in a way that it's if they want democracy, it is their own people's job, basically, more or less. Of course, we have a moral stance still, but we help them if there is opportunity, like in Libya or in Syria, This is the Turkey's position. But after taking sides with the Arab revolutions, America also tried to punish Turkey by creating a pseudo-state with the PKK in the southern borders. They want to leave the whole Syrian border to the PKK. And of course, along with the Barzani referendum or the Kurdish referendum in northern Iraq, it was going to be almost like Turkey was blocked or kind of separated, like almost like a Kurdish belt between Turkey and the Arab world. Of course, we refused that. Turkey refused that. And Turkey opposed the Kurdish revolution, Kurdish referendum, and then also opposed the American project to build a PKK state in its southern borders, and made some efforts to break break in this or break this belt. There is no continuous line between the Kurdish PKK. The PKK mostly now concentrated in the east of Euphrates River. They still have a big American support and Western, especially European support, financially, military support from America. In any case, Turkey is dealing with these crises, and of course, recently Turkey focused on the internal elections, which was very critical, whether this active Turkey will be continuing or going back to more passive approach in the Middle East. Looks like the latest election give Erdogan an okay, and he's going to continue with maybe more confidence in the Middle East. Turkey, of course, is present has a voice in many of these crises, like in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya. Not much involved in Yemen and Sudan, involved in humanitarian-wise, humanitarian aid, but not politically, is not taking much stance in Yemen and Sudan. But these crises also still affecting Turkey, and Turkey as a trading partner, like China, as a trading country, they have a big interest to keep these trade lines, trade routes, like the Red Sea, Indian Ocean, Mediterranean, to keep it safe. So we have a major stake. Turkey's presence in Somalia is known, help them to also get better. But if we come back to our main point, the Chinese-American rivalry, I think China still not so assertive, but I can say it active, more active, not assertive, as an alternative policy. Like, we don't see what China thinks in Sudan crisis or in Libya. In Syria only, we have seen China use several vetoes in the UN resolutions. But other than that, we don't see China still preferring a low-profile approach, and doesn't want to get involved in these crises or take side in these crises. Sometimes impose a solution in these crises. We don't see that. But the latest, I think, mediation between Iran and Saudi Arabia is a major thing, and Turkey publicly supported this approach. This mediation and this reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia. But also, personally, as an expert on the Middle Eastern affairs, we see this is a major change, which especially the previous scheme was, of course, all the calculations, especially Western calculations and American calculations, were made that Iran-Arab conflict. But now this thing looks like it's disappearing. I don't see, a total maybe friendship, but looks like a normal relations, not antagonistic relations. I think we'll change the dynamics, geopolitics of the Middle East. I think China has a big role in this. They can, especially the scheme was, unstoppable Iran or aggressive Iran. And the appearance, at least, Iran kind of threatening the Arab countries, and Arab countries are seeking help from America or from the West. This scheme is no longer, because now they are not, I mean, Iran is not taking this aggressive stance, and especially with Chinese pressure, I think, or Chinese incentives. And then these Gulf countries won't need to buy that many American weapons or European weapons or even Chinese or Russian weapons. And we also follow the Saudis' share of exports to China is very much. And overall, if we just see as an economic logic, we see, you know, America is an oil exporter country, and Saudi Arabia is also a major oil exporting country. So in the normal market, they are competitors, not, you know, both of them want to sell their product. So this puts them in a more competitive, of course, they are not in a position to challenge American hegemony as the maybe main superpower, but looks, and there are signs of resistance, there are signs of independence, also signs of kind of disappointment from America, and these are very noticeable. And in Turkey also, we support kind of, we have so many regional problems, sometimes instigated from outside, but also maybe local dynamics. But now there is a hope for solving these problems regionally, or there is a new vision. I hear it from the Saudis, from Turkish, and even sometimes Iranians. They began to say that let's solve our problems by ourselves. This is significant because you know, if you expect somebody else, you know, it's going to take a while, even if they want to solve it. And this regional cooperation approach, I think, is now becoming stronger, becoming more obvious, and it's going to make a major change. So Turkey is part of all these discussions, and all these negotiations have Astana process going on yesterday and today in Russia, Turkey, Assad regime, Syria, Iran, and Russia are discussing how to solve the Syrian problem, which is an international problem also, and is not Turkey don't see it as Astana is not an alternative to the Geneva process, but because Geneva process is idle, Turkey at least preferring to solve the Syria issue, at least, you know, some portions of it, I mean, bilaterally or trilaterally in the Astana process, which is also working. So it stopped bloodshed. It also stopped the flow of refugees, and many changes. Now Egypt is Turkey's Egyptian relations becoming stronger. Turkey's also relations with the Emirates becoming, I mean, better. I think it's going to be better, more. I mean, many of the countries, neighboring countries, were waiting for the elections, thinking maybe Erdogan might go. Now he's there. I think everybody is, you know, making their own future calculations that Erdogan is going to be there for a long while. So I think the relations will accelerate after this election's outcome. So this is basically it. And if there is any questions, I want to, of course, answer as much as I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Uysal. I wanted to dig a little bit deeper about the Abraham Accords, and you mentioned something about the scheme being no longer, you know, that rivalry that the region has known for a long time between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The recent restoration of diplomatic ties that you mentioned between the two regional rivals of Iran and Saudi Arabia, with the help of China, and the recent visit to China by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas indicates that China's campaign to gain a strong foothold in the region has been unchallenged so far. How do we interpret this in the context of the normalization initiatives ushered in by the Abraham Accords? If Ambassador wants to take that one first.
Can you please repeat the question again? I
Yeah,
thought you were asking.
I was asking, we've had China, Dr. Issam mentioned that China has mediated or tried to reconcile between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and that scheme that we've known before that is no more, meaning like that rivalry has, at this point, it's not a rivalry anymore. It's just, on decent terms. And we've seen also the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas' recent visit to China, hoping to get the same out of that visit, out of China what they did to with Saudi Arabia and Iran. So how do we interpret this in the context of the normalization initiatives ushered in by the Abraham Accords? Like, how is this going to take place? Will Israel respond to this in terms of the peace process in the Middle East?
Well, there are two things which, in my view, for any initiative which happens in the region, we have to, even though the question of Palestine is currently maybe on the back burner of many of the countries who were traditionally supporting the Palestinian cause, it still remains a major cause of concern for the Arab street, or countries in the Muslim world. So that will always be a red line, so to say. How strong will be, that will depend on the times. At the same time, what China is trying to do is, China is trying to project itself, as it says, it is an honest mediator. The thing is that the stability in the Middle East or West Asia is of utmost importance for the world, and more importantly, for the oil-dependent countries in the region. Also, the security of the sea lanes is very important, and Iran is an important partner in that. Why did it happen is because Saudi Arabia, which had, and just go back to 1979, they were all on the same side, despite the religious divide. Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran, all three were under the US bloc. But 79 onwards, we have seen these riotous increasing, especially between Iran and Israel. Now, Saudi Arabia obviously has been suffering from this infructuous war in Yemen. And they had seen that despite the US security umbrella, that was breached. And so they lost a bit of confidence, especially the response was not commensurate to what the Saudis or the Emiratis expected from the United States in that. So obviously they are looking at someone else. So the first thing that comes to mind, and as Professor Sal also said, is that they want to somehow develop a modus vivendi with one another. We are seeing the rapprochement between Turkey and Saudi Arabia and UAE and Egypt and other countries. We are seeing Egypt and Tehran now talking and hoping to open embassy. Iraq was acting in this conduit. We have seen even with Israel, for that matter, as you mentioned, Abraham Accords and all. So today, firstly, they want to try a bilateral and regional approach. That region needs to stabilize somehow when the powers are in a different sort of a contestation. And so they're trying to have their own dependencies. Also, we are seeing that they want to, like Vision 2030 of Prime Minister Mohammed bin Salman. I mean, that is very clearly, or that of UAE or for others. Now, UAE is projecting itself as a power which is non-religious in many ways. For example, the Tolerance Summit and all kinds of things. So it's trying to create a separate identity and wanting to live with everyone. They call their problem a zero problem policy with all their neighbors. So they are the first ones to have normalized with UAE. So we are seeing that, and Iran also needs friends, but Iran does not want an external interference from the United States or others. So now most of these countries are coming to the idea that let's try to sit together and work, in which China is trying to help. And I think that is a welcome change. Only thing, it needs to be lasting so that other confidence building measures get converted into some kind of a long-term partnership. So even if we can eliminate some kind of direct conflict, that is the best thing that can happen to the Middle East. And I think even the US welcomes that. Everybody would welcome, but Chinese have taken the lead. They're also trying to talk to Abbas and to Benjamin Netanyahu, so that they have offered themselves. So many countries have done, but China is trying again and again. Then they are also trying to. They have special envoys have been appointed for Russia-Ukraine war. So they're trying to project themselves as a bridge builder or a peacemaker in the region.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think Dr. Isal has a comment or question.
I want to comment on the Abraham Accord and the Abbas meeting Chinese president, and this is more symbolic. I don't see as a major, but it is a step. It is significant, and it means, you know, China is saying that I am here also, but the role of Mahmoud Abbas in the Palestinian conflict is very symbolic, very minimal. And also, you know, the crisis is going on in the conflict is going on in Israel and Palestine, and Abbas has no idea about what's going on in this conflict, and doesn't have a role. Israel doesn't recognize them, and but he is there. He is also representing the you know, non-present but active Palestinian Authority, Palestinian state, and there is discussion about Palestinian statehood. In any case, China saying that we are also part of this debate and we want to contribute, which is, I think, which is fine, which is good overall, but it is still a low profile. And for the Abraham Accords, of course, the first or initial deal or initial ambition or kind of high expectations from the Abraham Accords, I think now is diminished, and especially Saudi Arabia is the big fish in a way for Israel to convince, and Saudi Arabia did not jump in, even though Saudi Arabia supported these Abraham Accords with maybe with Morocco or Bahrain and others, but did not join in because they have maybe also they value their leadership as moral leadership in the Islamic world. They don't want to be hugging Netanyahu, especially a right-wing radical that don't care much about what others think, even America or Saudis. So it is not a one way. I mean, in the initial time, in the Trump time, it was like, you know, we give whatever they want. Now the mood changed. We don't want to give anything for free to Netanyahu, and kind of stopped. And the latest killing, I mean, Egyptian border guard attacked Israeli security and killed some soldiers there last month, I think. I mean, more or less. And this shows that, you know, the courage is still there, even though maybe the governments normalize with Israel, people's normalization, you know, accepting even this coming. Israel says this was a kind of revenge attack from a Egyptian soldier to Israeli forces as a revenge attack or kind of a political attack. If it is so, then it means, you know, Egyptian government normalized with Israel, but Egyptian people or even the security personnel did not. So it's going to take a long time to realize this. Also, we require concessions from Israel. Looks like Netanyahu has no appetite for this, and so this Abraham Accord is not progressing maybe the way Israel wanted. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for your comments and your insights. I think we're running a little bit over time. I'd love to take this discussion much further, but in the interest of time, I would like to wrap up with one final question and with brief responses if possible. So, are we moving towards a multipolar world? Who would like to take this on?
Well, it's
I can maybe too also. Yes, go ahead,
Go ahead, Ambassador.
yes.
Ambassador. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Thank you so much. I agree with what Professor said about the Abraham Accords. Of course, efforts are being made to even expand that, but as you know, it all depends on the many situations, especially the Palestinian issue is very important and critical to it. As far as the multipolar, yes, we are aiming for a multipolar world. But today's time and age, the only multilateralist, multipolar, or whatever you may call it, is the only organization that has become non-functional. And that is the United Nations and its various allied organizations. But what we are looking at is, we are looking at an era of multi-alignments, minilaterals. Those are the kind of groupings that are going to be there. But the way the Russia-Ukraine war is going, I still feel that we might have a Cold War 2.0 kind of situation, which will be punctuated by several minilaterals, plurilaterals, trilaterals here and there, trying to find a space in a short time. Eventually, they will coagulate into a third dimension, which is nations for strategic autonomy.
Thank you. Dr. Risa, your
Yes,
comments?
a short note, then we'll listen to the Ustaz Mohammed. I mean, of course, we are moving toward a multipolar world because America doesn't have the capacity, doesn't have the moral leadership to, it has economic and maybe military superiority, but looks like, they don't want to, they have no appetite to keep everybody happy. So it produces competition. And China says, I am here. Russia already challenged American military, maybe hegemony in Europe. We don't know where it's going. I consider this as a third world war from the beginning. And it still already have very serious implications for world geopolitics. Whoever wins, even they now make a deal, will have serious geopolitical implications, but whoever wins will have also serious implications. Now we are moving toward the multipolar world. Turkey also said, the UN ambassador mentioned the UN an inability to solve any crisis, except the grain deal that Turkey mediated, and UN also was part of it, and they were very happy to see this deal, any kind of success for the grain deal. But Turkey was a major part of mediation. In any case, the UN became obsolete, irrelevant to many of these challenges. Plus, Turkey says that the world is also bigger than these 5 permanent security members that are dominating the global security agenda. I think we need more participation from Asia, from Africa, from the Muslim world also. So but we see America is losing at least the moral leadership now, especially in Ukraine. We'll see what will happen. Might lose also the military and economic leadership, but these things take a long time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to wrap up by thanking everybody here, especially our esteemed panelists.
Rachel, I just Dr. Karim, would you like to say something? You raised your hand. Please go ahead.
I'll just comment on that multipolar world. I think it's too premature to comment like that. It's moving towards that, but it will take a long time. Let's see the facts on the ground. Who can challenge the American hard power or even the soft power, or they're going for huge polarization in the Indo-Pacific, like they are having Quad and they're strongest alliance relations with Japan, with South Korea, with Philippines. China is alone here. And in the foreign affairs, I was reading that Russia has turned into a vassal state of China. So China is fine. It is progressing well. But to challenge the America up front, it'll take a long time, I think, and another 50 years or so. That's how I look at it. Yeah, that's fine. The Middle East is there's a separate realignment is coming up, but then as a big power, who's going to threaten the Americans? The NATO is getting stronger, and that is again with the Americans. So it takes a long time, I think. So I don't buy the idea that it is going for multipolar world so soon. It will take at least few more decades.
Yeah, Dr. Karim, and the furthermore, the thing is that about to facilitate the stuff, the resources that like in the regional countries, we have like conflicts, crises, like Professor Vishal mentioned that, and in people and in the region as well, the border dispute and so on, and main thing is the resources, like might and power, both. So it will take time to go to like we are friends of all, but it's good to listen these kind of statements. But when the actual work, who is going to lead that?
Dr. Indu, if I may leave with a last thought.
Yeah, sure.
The thought is, if you see in the 20th and 21st century, none of the superpowers has won a single war. They have lost. So brute power, if we are talking about, it really not that great. Number one, China lost in Vietnam, USA lost in Vietnam. Soviet Union lost in Afghanistan, got disintegrated. United States lost in Afghanistan, had to leave out. Russia has taken 1.5 years to overcome Ukraine, whatever it is. It may be so all are getting decimated as far as the military power. No doubt, today nobody can match the US operability across the world. But the reason that US is also looking at partners in different geographies is also a reason to contain China, because it is really feels threatened. And I don't have to say that. We have to say their own national strategies, which have just come out, where what they consider China and the exact words there give it away, that how they look at China. So, as I said, even with China, despite the possibility of contestation, conflicts, decimation, whatever it is, they are still trying to buy time each side, because they are indulging. Today, Blinken is in Beijing. He just met Xi Jinping. And so they are trying to just have some kind of modus vivendi on the common minimum program. But there are the next wars we are looking at are technological wars.
That's correct, sir.
That is something that we need to worry about.
But America is still far, much more dominant power. They have got to. Yeah, hard power is. You are very right, sir, Mr. Sir. You are very right that hard power ultimately doesn't last long, because they lost in Vietnam, they lost in Iraq, they lost in Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. But then still China is no match militarily to the American military, no match at all. Not at all. Not in diplomacy, not in soft power. Well, but it is moving towards that. But I don't know, maybe mid of this century, China might come and challenge the Americans openly.
China, sir, China is looking at 2049 in any case.
Yeah, 2049. I was precisely going to say that. I did a study on that, and my assessment is that 2049 is their goal. But let's see.
Yes.
China has got 12 America has got 12 aircraft carriers. China has only 2 of them. Yeah, China is strong regionally, all right. But can China call shots in the Middle East if required, or in Africa if required, or in South America if required? They cannot. But then things are transforming. I agree, sir. Things are changing. China is trying to now compete. Someday, by mid of the century, they will then challenge the Americans openly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for your comments.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Today, and for the audience.
Thank you. Nice.
And thank you. And Indu, I'll hand it over to you to wrap to close any closing statements if you have. And you're on mute.
Thank you, Rochelle. And it was a fantastic and discussion and very insightful. So I would like to thank to our speakers, panelists, and the audience as well. But there are a lot of stuff to discuss it, to unpack it. So we hope to take a second round of this webinar session, and we will invite our speakers again. And of course, Professor Uysal, I had a question for you, but later, maybe in the next webinar, I will discuss with you for the Turkey. So, this was a wonderful discussion, and thank you all again, and hopefully to meet you someone in person, to all the experts. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.